welcome everyone. My name is Greg Winchell. I'm filling in for Lindsay Tyson. She is the president of MDCRES, and she unfortunately had to be out of town this week. She does such a wonderful job with this, but you all are stuck with me, and we'll muddle our way through. So this is the Denver chapter of the Metro Denver chapter of the Colorado Renewable Energy Society. Our mission is to support a 100% renewable Colorado through education, engagement, and connection to networking opportunities across all of Denver. And under less COVID times, that's what we do. We get together, we meet in person, usually downtown at the Alliance Center, and we network beforehand and so on, get to know each other. We are a nonprofit 501c3. This is the agenda for the evening. Pretty simple, straightforward. About 10 minutes of announcements and some policy updates and things like that. Then it's about 7:10-ish. We'll go to our featured speaker, which is Jessica Andersen from Denver. And we'll have some question and answer sessions throughout. We'd like to encourage you to become a member of CRES if you have any interest. Here's the connection information, the website here, if you'd like to join. It is a fun group. Like I said, we network, and when we meet in person, and usually there's pizza and that sort of thing. And we want to hear from you. If you have any feedback, some ideas about presentations or things to improve or what have you, here's our email address for contacting us. Also, like every group, if you wish to support us financially, here's some connection information. Here's also our Venmo information, and if you a nice little feature that Amazon offers, you can list us as your charity of choice. Whenever you make a purchase, a certain portion of your purchase will go toward CRES, if that's something you'd be interested in doing. Another nice announcement: it's our 25th anniversary of CRES, so we're offering a 25% discount off of the annual membership. And we're also trying to encourage folks to transition to our new payment platform, which is FlipCause. And we have the promo code here, CRS25. All right, so at this point, usually in our updates and so on, we do a policy update. Now, Johnny Rogers he usually handles this for us. He was not available either. So he did provide us with some slides, and I'll just read them off. And he's very knowledgeable about this, so it's really a misfortune that we don't have him. But some of the stuff you guys have probably heard. Biden, our executive branch, is proposing a $3.5 trillion budget to advance with the infrastructure deal. This is going to include 80% clean energy by 2030, a new clean energy standard. It's supposed to the goal is to cut carbon emissions in half by 2030. He's pushing for clean energy and vehicle tax credits, which is, like to get more of that. Building weatherization, electrification, there's polluter import fees, and there'll include a clean energy accelerator. I don't actually know what that is, but sounds good. And then he's expanding or developing the Civilian Climate Corps, which I think sounds very exciting. More locally, with Excel, there's going to be some rate increases. They're going to be proposing a case for a rate increase to increase revenues by $470 million, $343 million net. The funds are requested in part for $1 billion of distribution-related investments, smarter meter substations, and other grid infrastructure. They are asking to increase current rates for customers by 13%, residential customers. So, that's something you may want to pay attention to. Also in local news, and I'm sure some of you who've been shopping the last week or so or have experienced this, there's going to be a 10 cents per bag fee on shopping bags to encourage everyone to bring their own bags and so on. Participants in state and federal food assistance programs will not be charged, and the fees are shared by the store and the city. All right, we'd like to announce our next event next month. We're having a very exciting event on August 19th at 6 p.m. And do take note of the time. It's 1 hour earlier because our guest speakers are on the East Coast. So to accommodate them, we're sort of meeting them halfway, so to speak. We're having this at 6 p.m., which probably would be, 8 p.m. their time, I guess. It's mapping inequality, redlining, and climate change. They will be addressing issues here in Denver, though they are more of a national level. It's Robert Nelson and LaDale Windling will explore correlations between mid-20th century redlining and environmental and health inequities today as a way of documenting and understanding the relationship between racist 20th century federal policies and contemporary inequalities. The presentation will focus particular attention on Denver. One of our members has heard these two gentlemen speak and said it was very good. So we encourage you to go. It's very topical these days. It's part of our mission to start addressing all the communities within Denver. So we encourage everyone to come to this. It sounds like it's just going to be excellent. And I'm very excited to announce Jessica Andersen, who's speaking with us tonight about our very own Denver Parks and Recreation. She'll be talking about resiliency and sustainability programs here in Denver. And since you all are here to see her, I will transfer over to her.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me, Greg. It's great to talk to your group. As Greg mentioned, we'll have breaks for question and answer, so feel free to type in the chat at any time. We'll stop if it's relevant. Otherwise, I have a few slides to purposefully respond to your questions if you have anything. So I'm here to talk about the Resiliency Program, which is part of Denver Parks and Recreation. A little bit about my background. My name is Jessica Andersen. I'm a senior resiliency planner with Denver Parks and Rec. I've been with the city for about 2 years. The end of this month will be my 2-year anniversary. I grew up in Wisconsin on a dairy farm, so my background is very embedded in our food system and the land and just being outside in nature and really that connection of how people grew up with the land. So that's how I really got into landscape architecture and planning. I have a degree in landscape architecture from Colorado State University. I got a master's degree in urban and regional planning from CU Denver. I've been in Colorado since 2004, so I feel like this is solidly my home now. I love it here. What else did I want to say? So previously to working for the city, I was a planner with the city of Boulder for a few years, and I previously worked as a landscape architect in Denver for an architecture firm that focused on healthcare and education facilities, so schools and hospitals, which really, again, relates to that connection to nature and our education and healing outcomes. So that's how I wound up with Denver. Our resiliency program is relatively new. So the program was officially established in the fall of 2019. However, we've been working on these types of programs for about a decade. We previously had these goals and things wrapped into our natural resources program, and we officially rebranded as Resiliency. And this came about as part of our Denver Right process, which was approximately a 3-year community-driven process over all of Denver's community planning, parks, transportation departments to do integrated planning for the whole city to develop a 20-year plan. So this included the comprehensive plan, Blueprint Denver, which really drives our zoning and land use regulations, the game plan for the Healthy City, which is Denver Parks and Recs, master plan, and Denver Moves, which is transportation, bicycle planning, pedestrian planning, through our Department of Transportation and Infrastructure. So all of these plans previously existed and were about 20 years old. Most of them were previously adopted in the early 2000s. So over the last 20 years, they'd really run their course, and it was time to reimagine what Denver was based on all the growth that's been happening over the last 2 decades. So the game plan for the Healthy City, as I just mentioned, our previous game plan was adopted in 2003, so this was an update to that plan. It's our 20-year strategic master plan, really based on that input from the Denverite process and integrated with these other plans I also just mentioned. There was a huge amount of public engagement, lots of community outreach and touch points that also dovetailed really nicely with our Parks Legacy Fund sales tax that was passed in the fall of 2018. So thank you for voting for that. That really helps us move our progress forward in the terms of parks and our funding. We've basically doubled our funding and are set to probably quadruple or triple that based on how the economy recovers. So it's a really exciting time for nature in the city. This will really help us. The game plan helps us set the stage for how we grow and expand our parks and recreation system. So the game plan has 4 guiding principles: every drop, every person, every dollar, and uniquely Denver. These are kind of the overall goals of the game plan of how we really want to focus our efforts in the city. The resiliency program specifically is highly integrated into every drop. So this talks about our environmental sustainability, being more resilient, heavily focused on this every drop principle. The 4 guiding principles were developed into 5 strategies. So adapt is directly related to every drop and talks about basically our climate change initiatives. I have too much going on my screen right now. I apologize. Give me 1 second. There we go. So adapt really refers to how we respond to climate change. So things like increasing drought, increasing more frequent flooding, those stronger weather events, more intense weather events that climate change is bringing, increasing temperatures. Denver is a very distinct city for the heat island effect. So thinking about how parks correspond to that. So the second guiding principle, every person, relates to the diversity and grow strategies. So these 2 really help guide how we will expand and adjust our recreation and parks amenities within the city. Every dollar relates to reinvesting, so how we're investing in our assets, resources, and people. And then finally, the uniquely Denver guiding principle relates to the connect strategy. So how we relate to Denver's unique nature and culture and what makes our city so special. And this applies to both of our urban parks and our mountain park system. So Denver Parks has parks in the city and up in the mountains. So places like Red Rocks are all owned by the city and managed under our mountain parks program. And again, the resiliency team really focuses on this adapt every drop principle. So this slide is a little text heavy, but it just goes into a little more detail of each of these strategies and how they connect and how they kind of relate to where we're focusing our efforts going forward. So you can see under adapt, this is really talking about our, stormwater and waterways, the environmental energy use, things like that, that the resiliency team is focused on. I won't go into too much detail about this, and I can share the slides if anyone's interested in having the slides later to read more of this detail. So based on the game plan for a healthy city, we identified approximately 100 strategies and recommendations that were prioritized into a 3-year plan. So we used staff input, the community input, our departmental goals, and distilled this down to the 25 key priority strategies. So these were all items that we distilled down into our 3-year plan and are actively working to adjust. So this plan, the game plan was passed in 2019. So we are in year 3 right now of our 3-year initial plan. So we're in the process of evaluating where we are with all of our metrics in terms of these key strategies. We're starting to measure our progress and figuring out how to keep measuring that going forward and figuring out what we're going to do in the next 3 years. So this will be an evolving process over time. And some of these strategies we'll just continue to keep doing over time. Some things will be complete and be able to check off the list. There's really a little bit of everything mixed in here. So I've highlighted in red, you can see the key strategies that relate to the resiliency program. So we do a lot of ecosystem restoration and resilient landscapes. Obviously, we also look at a lot of emerging trends, things that, data-driven, new and innovative things we're looking at. Under the Resiliency Program, we also have the Trails Program, so looking at that multimodal access and connections. And then under the Connect and Uniquely Denver, connecting nature in the city and the innovative public spaces are what we really focus on. So the resiliency team, we're an integrated approach to managing Denver's natural resources. So we are trying to look at this system holistically and really bring together a focal point within our department of where staff from all levels can come to us and we can help kind of coordinate this on all levels. So as I previously mentioned, again, every drop, this is so important. The game plan is something we talk about every single day in our job. So I'll keep reiterating it a few times in the next few slides, and then we'll move on to something more exciting. But the resiliency team is really here to provide that leadership to be a more resilient and environmentally sustainable organization, citywide, not just in Denver Parks and Rec, but we really want to assume that leadership role overall. And then in terms of the Uniquely Denver aspect of our guiding principles, we're trying to guide Denver's parkland to be more representative of the historic culture of predominantly prairie landscapes. So currently, approximately 60% of our park system is irrigated. And as we continue to evolve some of our landscapes from irrigated bluegrass to more native prairie landscapes, we'll save resources, we'll save water, energy, taxpayer dollars, and at the same time create habitat for our native pollinators. We'll sequester carbon, we'll build the soil, and bring more nature into the city for our residents to experience. So every drop embodies the idea that we maintain and improve the city's relationship to our natural resources, including water, open space, wildlife, trees, vegetation. All of this in the face of climate change and our growing population. So our goal is really to work on these holistic management strategies to implement large and small scale projects on all levels of Denver Parks and Recreation. And then Uniquely Denver, this is how we celebrate our historic, cultural, and social and environmental resources, while also adapting our facilities to meet the emerging trends of our city and our culture. So the Resiliency Program links Denver Parks and Recs to our natural trails and waterways through open space, native landscapes, and ethnobotanical history. Briefly, our team structure and how we fit within the department. So Parks and Rec is nestled underneath the mayor, and we're split into recreation team and a parks team. We are under parks planning, design, and construction. We have a planning team and a design and construction team, and resiliency is under the planning team. And our staff, as I mentioned earlier, the team was started in 2019 when we had a resiliency principal planner, and she has really worked to grow our team to what it is today, which is really exciting. I'm the senior resiliency planner. We have an associate resiliency planner who's been with us for about a year. This spring, we just started our resiliency youth program. So we hired a resiliency program administrator to help us run that program. We have a senior trails planner, and next month we're hiring a resiliency intern. So this is going to be a great opportunity to bring in youth from all levels. With our youth program, they're primarily middle schoolers to high schoolers in their early kind of just first experiences of having a job in the green industry. Our intern will be a junior in high school, and he will be working for 3 years with us as he transitions from high school into his adult career life. So it's a really exciting time to see this resiliency program and our pipeline of jobs and careers that we're creating for this industry. Our team has worked a lot in the last year and a half of expanding our influence. So we are working on enhancing and adding partnerships within the city and externally. We are working a lot with the Office of Climate Action, Sustainability, and Resiliency, which is also a new department under the mayor. We will be kicking off a resiliency master plan that we'll co-lead with that office, hopefully later this fall or early next spring. That will kick off citywide. We are the liaison to Mile High Flood District, formerly called Urban Drainage and Flood Control District. So they do a lot of work with our waterways and trails and things like that. So we're highly involved with coordinating with them. We have an internal Parks and Rec Resiliency Task Force that I'll talk about a little bit more shortly. This really brings in all levels of our Parks and Rec staff, from boots on the ground, you know, our maintenance staff, all the way up to the executive management level, and brings everyone together to talk about resiliency and how we can make our job and our parks more resilient. We coordinate a lot with the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure, specifically their wastewater team, their green infrastructure team, and their bikeways team. The more we can overlap with them and create larger and more impactful projects, the more sustainable our city becomes. So that green infrastructure really dovetails with waterways and with our bikeways that often are along our streams and waterways. We have formed a new partnership with the CSU Salazar Center. So that's a new partnership that we're working on establishing. And then we're also working on creating more external partnerships with neighborhood groups or resiliency nonprofits, such as MDCRES. This is one of those goals that we really want to bring in more stewardship and more awareness of our residents and connect them to that nature and how they can help us and be more invested in their neighborhood parks. So we're slowly expanding out, and we want to keep growing as our team grows. So as I mentioned, the Resiliency Task Force, we meet monthly as a large group. We have, I think, about 40 staff that are involved in this task force. Each of them are involved in one of our 5 subgroups to really talk about their experience and their ideas about these different topics. So our education and outreach team is working on a partnership with the Leave No Trace program. So that should kick off later this fall to make that formal and do a lot more education and outreach around that. We're doing a lot of internal training for staff so that they understand how to care for and maintain resilient landscapes that are different than the turf grass that they're used to. We're incorporating more pollinator signage to make residents and also our staff more aware of the different types of pollinators and insects in our city. Our grants and funding partnership is really looking at how do we leverage outside dollars and how do we maximize our projects and impact by partnering with other sources. Our policy and standards group is working on best practices, how to care for the resilient landscapes, kind of making our staff more consistent about what they're doing across the city. Our resilient landscapes team is really looking at the actual landscapes. What plants are we putting in there? How are we growing those plants? So we grow a lot of plants at our city park greenhouse for our annual gardens, and we're starting to grow more perennial plants to convert annual gardens to perennial gardens. They also look at native seed mixes and how we can expand the diversity of our native landscapes from just grasses to including more of those pollinator-friendly flowers and that type of thing. And our water conservation group is really focused on our irrigation system and how we can make that more efficient. So we're looking at switching all of our irrigation controllers to a centrally controlled system that's all computer controlled from a central location that can adjust irrigation systems on the fly based on weather, based on watering patterns, all types of factors. So we have, I think, just over 50% of our parks irrigation systems across the city have been switched to the central control. So that's an ongoing process we're working on. We're also working on expanding our recycled water program and how the impacts of recycled water interact with plants. And then, of course, retrofitting our existing irrigation systems, some of which are multiple decades old and very inefficient. So it's a slow process to convert all of these. So the resiliency team has basically 5 focus areas. We look at landscape and ecosystem restoration, so landscapes that are native but are degraded or heavily infested with weeds. We look at restoring those. Water conservation and irrigation and landscape conversions, so changing out our irrigation systems to be more efficient, and also converting those underutilized bluegrass spaces to more of that native prairie, lower water usage spaces. Our lakes and waterway management, so this includes our lakes, our streams, our gulches, any water in our city, looking at water quality as well as erosion along these areas, the stream banks, the wetlands, things like that, we're all involved in. Creating pollinator habitat, so this includes changing some of our annual garden beds into perennial garden beds, as well as adding wildflowers across our native landscapes. And then our urban regional trail system is the 5th element. So landscape ecosystem restoration, we're really looking at how do we prioritize parks for restoration and how do we increase that diversity within these landscapes. So first of all, we look at vacant or underutilized areas to convert or restore. And then how do trees interact with these native landscapes? So thinking about a lot of our trees aren't native. There's very few tree species that are native to Colorado. So some of our existing tree canopy will need more irrigation than a native landscape will. So we are trying to balance those areas to make sure we can maintain our tree canopy and achieve these ecological ecosystem goals as well. Water conservation and landscape conversions. So we're looking to restore or convert to climate resilient landscapes. So getting rid of the bluegrass turf wherever we can and converting to native. I'll talk in a little bit about our landscape typology, which is a lot of data we use to identify which areas to prioritize. Lake and waterway management. So we look a lot at acquisitions. As we grow our park system, what areas make sense around our water bodies and streams to improve our trail system connections, as well as water conveyance, stormwater, and water quality. We're working with our partners, such as Mile High Flood District, to expand and modify open spaces and effectively treat runoff. So thinking holistically about the system. And then we're starting to really look at those green infrastructure opportunities to improve water quality. So some are small scale water quality, all the way up to that spectrum of larger detention basins, and how do we make those more resilient landscapes. So last year we completed an assessment of our lakes and waterway systems to show existing conditions and create kind of a baseline of where we are right now to work forward and improve those lake and waterway systems. And then trails. Last year, we also did a trail inventory of all of our trail system to look at what is the surface, what is the width, what is the condition of the pavement, to really understand the quality and nature of our trail system. A lot of these upgrades, as I mentioned before, are linked with our waterway projects. So working with Mile High Flood District to improve our waterways, landscapes, and trails. And then also connecting with our Department of Transportation and Infrastructure plans to make sure our bikeways and trails are consistently signed, easy to navigate. That's always a work in progress of how the trail system works. And we're also starting to make a priority of creating trailheads. So the first project that will have a big trailhead focus will be Sand Creek, which has just kicked off construction this year on approximately a 3-mile segment. So this slide shows the overall map of Denver's trail system. You can see the large regional trails are in red, like South Platte River and Cherry Creek. The blue segments are our connector trails, so those trails that go out into the neighborhoods and connect our residents to the regional trail system. And the purple trails are local trails. So they're also very important, but a lot of these don't connect to our larger system. So we're starting to analyze how can we connect these trails and fill in the gaps in our system. Something we've identified to work on with our new trails planner this year is the Northeast Denver plan. So looking at the Central Park neighborhood, Montbello, Green Valley Ranch, looking at the gaps in the system in that area and working with a lot of the development that's happening in that area to connect our gaps. We've also installed, I think, a dozen trail counters that will count pedestrians and bicyclists on our trails to give us some actual data of where users are on the trails, how frequently they're using them, so we can prioritize trail maintenance based on use. And we're really starting to focus our projects and development on data-driven decision-making. So I mentioned a little bit previously our landscape typology data that I'll go into momentarily. We have data about irrigated areas versus unirrigated areas. Denver Parks has been doing a big focus on neighborhood equity. So looking at a series of socioeconomic factors that really strive to make better access to parks and green space for the communities that have the most need. We have an extensive tree inventory, as I mentioned, that we are working with our forestry team on coordinating where to put these more native low water landscapes. Our trails inventory that I just mentioned, and then we also overlay Mile High Flood District's drainage studies to help us prioritize our projects. So here is a map of the equity index. So you can see the darker colors are areas that show greater need for park access, park acres, park land to alleviate some of those health inequities. So you can see neighborhood by neighborhood. The darker green areas will overlay our project priorities. And frequently the higher equity needs will win when we have competing funds. So moving on to I thought I had a break in here for questions sooner than this, but bear with me, it'll be coming soon. Our landscape typology was created, I think, 3 years ago, and it studied the whole transect of our park spaces from basically native virgin landscapes up through the purely anthropomorphic park spaces. So like the playgrounds, the turf grass. You can see in this slide that spectrum of different types of spaces. This graphic kind of shows you an image of what each of those types of spaces look like. So this helps us divide up our landscape types into prioritizing. So this will give us an idea of what needs to be restored, what could be candidates for conversion, and each park has data collected about each of these landscape types, giving them a score. So in certain parks, you'll see a score of good or fair for certain turf grass areas, and the fair or poor areas would be higher candidates for conversions. So this graphic shows distribution-wise what our typologies look like across the city. As you can see, bluegrass lawn is a huge percentage of our park system. We also have a lot of the upland herbaceous, which is our native landscapes. The yellow and the red are the areas that are more degraded. So those areas would be where we focus our efforts on improving or converting. And there's also disturbed area. So those areas they're either social trails through parks that residents have worn down the landscape to try to access, for instance, the stream channel. We look at the degraded areas of thinking about different uses for those areas. What is the community kind of demanding or expressing, and what's not working and what should be worked into that. So those could be candidates for more active uses or more formal trails, for instance, but something different. So disturbed areas aren't necessarily candidates for restoration if there's reason to believe they'll just be trampled by residents again, still trying to access like the lake or the stream. So it's really kind of a layered approach to our data. This graphic shows an example of what that data looks like in our parks. So you can see this is all mapped out in our GIS system, and each polygon has a score associated with it. And for example, here you can see this is a riparian forested zone in Bear Creek Park. It's non-irrigated and it's in excellent condition. So areas like this, we really want to preserve and make sure those are highly maintained. And then our performance metrics. So as part of our game plan 3-year tracking, we're looking at how do we measure our successes? How much square feet have we converted? How much square feet of restoration have we improved in our landscapes? So each of these is something we're starting to track. And here's my break for questions. So I'll pause briefly and check on the chat. And Greg, you can check for me too.
Yes.
If there's any questions or comments.
We have a couple of questions. The first one is concerning water use on golf courses. How does the water used on golf courses in the semi-arid climate of Denver fit into the resiliency plan?
Great question. So our golf program is a subset of Parks and Recreation. They're really run as an enterprise fund. So far, the resiliency program hasn't been deeply involved with golf, so I can't speak to a lot of those metrics yet, but we are working on, we've included golf in our task force, so we're working on better communication to understand their resiliency goals and how we can help them better achieve those goals and understand what they're doing. I do know that our golf irrigation systems are extremely efficient and they're highly monitored. So it may seem that golf is very overwatered and bluegrass heavy and very intense, and it truly is, but they are making really, really good advancements in how they're tracking and measuring their water use.
Okay, good. The next question is concerning trees here in Denver. And the question is, it seems there is a slow but sure die-off of honey locust trees due to the borers and or the canker. Do Denver parks have many honey locust trees showing enough die-off of branches so that the trees need to be removed? If so, what types of trees do you plan to plant to replace them?
Great question. And it is extremely hard to be a tree in Denver. It's very hard to grow trees here. I don't know specifically about the honey locust, and I haven't heard significant impacts about the honey locust specifically. So that's something I'll keep in the back of my mind and probably will hear about soon. I do know with emerald ash borer, a lot of our ash trees are being treated and planned for removal and replacement over time. So we're losing a huge amount of our canopy from ash trees and the borers. The second part of that question was, what do we recommend replacing them with? Our forestry department has a huge list of species that they recommend. Some of the biggest ones they recommend are oak. Any species of oak do really well here. Kentucky coffee tree does really well here. Hackberry does really well here. But they have a whole list. So forestry is really looking at creating and enhancing the species diversity across the city. So we've started testing and trying a lot of new species that didn't historically grow in Denver. So we're expanding, kind of pushing that climate change envelope as our zone sort of changes over time to a warmer climate zone. We're looking at experimenting a lot with different species. But as we all know, experimenting can go wrong. So depending on the winter, we could have a lot of dieback from those experimental species. But just trying out to increase the diversity is really important and is a key for our forestry department right now.
Good. A moment ago, you showed a slide of water the distribution of bluegrass versus the herbaceous landscape and some other, a series of bubbles. What is the water consumption of the bluegrass lawn versus the herbaceous landscapes, if you know it?
Yeah, so our target irrigation is, I believe, 12 gallons on bluegrass, and it's 5 gallons on the herbaceous upland. So we're basically cutting the water usage in 1/3 by doing our conversions is the goal, the ideal. That's assuming our system is upgraded to central control and is new and efficient. Some of the older systems use way more water than that. But the target is, with our more native landscapes, we use 1/3 of the water that our bluegrass would use.
And that's all the questions.
Awesome. Well, I'll move on. The next section, I'm going to talk about 2 specific projects that we have right now. So this will be a little bit more interesting and more picture focused and less of these words on slides. So we have a project that's led by Mile High Flood District on Cherry Creek between Iliff and Quebec. So this project kicked off in the fall of 2019, and it is a complete redesign of the entire stream channel and the entire park space around this section of the stream channel. So the goal really was increase stream functioning, increase safety, aesthetics, ecological health. Our project partners, as I mentioned, Mile High Flood District is leading this effort. So Denver Parks and Rec is involved, the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure is involved, Arapahoe County, which owns the southern half of this site toward the Iliff end, is in Arapahoe County. Southeast Metro Stormwater Authority and Denver Water also owns a sliver of this property as well. It's approximately 1 mile in length and about 18 acres. As you can see from this photo, prior to construction, there was very extreme erosion along the stream channel. The vegetation was extremely degraded. You can see all the social paths where people walk through the site, walk their dogs. You can see a lot of debris. This historically had been a dumping ground, and probably not so historically as well. People dump whatever they want in these types of areas that seem sort of neglected. So there's a lot of safety concerns and very limited connection to the water. So here's another photo. You can see that extreme erosion. In some areas, this was about 15 to 20 feet bank incisions. So that kind of cliff there is about 20 feet tall from our storm events. Our project goals, so creating passive and active recreation. As you all know, the Cherry Creek Trail is one of our busiest regional trails in the region. But we also want to augment this beyond just the commuter trail. So we're looking at enhancing local pedestrian connectivity to get more of the neighborhood direct access to the park space and access to the stream. And then connecting, obviously, from Arapahoe County down to downtown Denver. We also wanted to improve the ecological process of the stream, so returning it more to that native habitat state, creating a healthy and stable stream system. So partly for flood control and flood protection for the neighborhood in this area, but also to make this stream more stable over time so that we don't have to redo this stream section when it erodes itself again. It should be erosion, I don't want to say proof because that's never true, but it should be less resistant to erosion over time. And then enhancing water quality. I think there are a dozen stormwater outfalls that drop into this 1 mile segment of the creek. So there's a lot of storm drainage from the adjacent communities that tie into this segment. Here's a few photos during construction. As you can see, wildlife has been present the whole time, which is really fun to see on site. We've been moving around a lot of rock, a lot of dirt. It was a huge excavation to create this stream, and the contractor diverted the entire stream throughout this section through several different phases. So it's been quite a process to see. Here's a rendering of what this project will look like once it's complete and green again. You can see downtown in the background. I have a video to share with you. I can put it on the correct screen for you to see it. Every month we've been taking drone video of the construction site. So it's really fun to see how this project has evolved over time. So this is about a month old when this drone was flown. So you can see we're starting at the eye-lift end and flying north. This structure was existing when the project started, but everything north of this was completely regraded and recontoured into the meandering stream you can see now. We added low flow crossings across, so these bridge structures that you're seeing, and created basically a tertiary trail system. So you'll have the primary regional trail will be moved closer to the stream, and you can see segments of that here. Part of the existing trail will remain, and then we're adding a secondary trail on the east side. So you can see a lot of how the stream is more meandering, and you can see these little pools that help with that water quality. There'll be some constructed wetlands to help create habitat and create more of that water quality and sediment removal from the stream system. And then neighborhood connections. So we're connecting around, this is Colorado Avenue cul-de-sac that you can see here, connecting that neighborhood into the site much better than it was before, and connecting up to Quebec Street in the background. So we've created several drop structures. You can see the riffling in the water that ripples. So a lot of our stone structures were brought in and excavated here to help aerate the water, help drop out sediment and particles from the water, and really clean it up as it flows into downtown. And this view toward downtown, you can see the existing stream channel just north needs some help too. And I think this next segment may be renovated in the next 5 to 10 years. So this has been a fun project. I'll escape out of this, back to the presentation. So it's been a long project, but it's come a long way. So you can see in these photos how much different it looks from that eroded, degraded landscape. This is looking south from Quebec. This view is approximately at Jewel, so the Denver Recycling Center is right next door, approximately at that point. Here's looking from Trenton, and Trenton Street is approximately the county line between Arapahoe and Denver, so the southern section. This is looking north back toward Denver. And then this is looking again back toward downtown. So the area, in this photo, the area to the right, that's kind of greenish, that is set to be redeveloped. That's actually an Arapahoe County property that will be built into residential in the next couple years. They're going to break ground soon. So there'll be a lot more residential here for that connection to the water, and these residents, I hope, will really appreciate this renovated landscape. So our schedule, we started construction in the fall of 2019. The stream channel realignment was completed earlier this spring in approximately March. We're working on the trail realignment, so it's kind of segment by segment. They're doing the trail, and that should be completed around Labor Day, we're hoping. The native planting on the south side and the east section occurred last fall, so some of our landscape has started to grow in, and it's actually looking really good. Surprisingly, we don't have huge invasive weed problems yet. Our construction and maintenance team is doing a phenomenal job. And then the rest of the landscaping will be done this fall and next spring. So we'll have the rest of the native seeding will be installed this summer, fall, and next spring we'll plant the overstory of trees. And then approximately a year from now, we'll plant another layer of shrubs. So we're really looking at phasing this to allow establishment of the grass and seed first to get that established before we bring in the next layers. So it's a fun project to see kind of that succession of how it grows in over time. So I'll have another quick break here if there's any questions about that project specifically.
No questions at this time,
Okay.
but I was going to ask a question of one of our members, a little out of the norm, but William Owen, you typed in a comment that I thought was interesting, and my touchpad is overly sensitive and I accidentally hit the delete. So if you don't mind typing in your comment regarding the trees and overlooked types of trees, I think is all I recall from it. And then maybe at the next break, I'll bring the comment up. I thought it was interesting. At this time, though, there's no questions.
We'll follow up on that one. So the next project I want to talk about is along Sanderson Gulch, which is one of our secondary, our connector trails, a secondary trail in our regional system. This project is just finishing the design phase and is really focused on pollinators. So the history, this project was initiated because of the Grand Doozy Music Festival back in 2018 at Overland Golf Course. A portion of the ticket sales were allotted to neighborhood improvements. The neighborhood gave a lot of public comment and really wanted to see native landscapes and outdoor classrooms. So pollinator habitat and that education piece, so bringing students into the park. This park is directly across from Godsman Elementary on basically Florida and Zuni Street. So our project goal is creating pollinator gardens, specific actual garden spaces, as well as making the entire restoration area very pollinator plant friendly. So we're using a lot more than just native grasses in this space. We're creating an outdoor classroom opportunity. We're looking at realigning and improving the trails and then restoring the native habitat. So here is a conceptual drawing of what the project looks like. So on the north, Godsman Elementary is right across Florida, and you can see this circular, I think you can see my cursor if I do this, crosswalk from the school, creating this looping promenade into the outdoor classroom. So this space will be natural boulders, kind of very informal looking, with that nature feel, surrounded by plants and shrubs. And then we'll have a series of formal pollinator gardens here. We have another formal pollinator garden here. This has actually been shifted slightly to the west in the design process. So this concept plan is a little bit old, but it's generally accurate. So a lot of formal gardens and a lot of area to be restored. So we're not touching the stream in this project. The stream is staying as it is. And you can see the regional trail will be completely resurfaced with concrete and a soft secondary trail of crusher fines. And then we're adding the north-south connection here. This is used a lot by neighborhood kids that go to school from the neighborhood to the south through the park. So we're formalizing that connection that didn't previously exist. This shows the different restoration areas. So in this diagram, we had 6 different seed mixes. We've cut this down to 4 seed mixes, which is still a lot. But it's focused, as you can see in the pink and purple, those will be very wildflower heavy mixes. So there'll be a lot of opportunities for different pollinator species to use this for foraging and food and really improve that habitat and diversity for pollinator insects, not just honeybees. And then the orange and the yellow will be primarily grass mixes to help stabilize the soil and rehabilitate that native landscape. So pollinator gardens, here are some precedent images of what this could look like in the future. We won't have formal benches or picnic tables or anything like that, but we're trying to bring in a very diverse mix of flowers, different types of colors, flower types, really promoting that full season spectrum of bloom time. So from early spring all the way into fall, so that different seasons of pollinators can come here and experience much better habitat. And then we're hoping to have a partnership that will install, I guess we call them pollinator motels, these little structures that create nesting habitats for our native pollinators. So unlike honeybees, most native pollinators will nest in either tubes or, reeds, different types of plants that they can burrow into instead of a hive type structure. So these different types of habitat will add to that educational aspect of how do our native pollinators live and what do their homes look like. And one of our priorities is not to allow any formal honeybee hives within these types of pollinator projects, because the honeybees really conflict with our native pollinators and compete for the same resources. So that's a policy we are going to strengthen more over time as we target our native pollinators and habitat restoration. So key points, I won't read all of this, a lot of it's reiterating what I've previously said. So this project basically redoes the entire native section of this park. There's a section to the east that's turf grass that will remain. We're not doing any conversion. It's really just restoration on this project. But the education piece and hoping to bring in wildlife, pollinators, you know, those layers are something really excited about bringing into this project and creating partnerships with the community and with the school to really create that stewardship aspect I mentioned earlier. So schedule, we're finishing up design and construction documents next week. So we hope to be able to get a contractor selected probably 2 to 3 months from now based on our city process. We'll break ground later this fall, and hopefully everything will be complete and open to the public again early summer 2022. We do currently have plans for planting some of the pollinator garden areas with our Resilient Communities Youth Group, which I mentioned earlier, as well as we've started talking with the American Indian Commission here in Denver to use some ethnobotanical plants to incorporate into these spaces. So we're hoping to get a partnership in which they could bring in their groups for education and plant plants that are meaningful to them in their culture. And we've also been talking to the People Pollinator Action Network, which is heavily interested in creating that pollinator habitat for our native bees and native insects. So it'll be really fun, and I'm really excited about this project because we'll have those partnerships and I'll get to get my hands dirty and work with some of our youth and community members to actually install parts of it. So another quick break for questions, and then I only have a few more slides left. So Greg, if you have your question or anyone else has questions.
Yes, one of our members has a comment, and it may be something you can add as well. It's concerning the different types of trees and how they're treated around here. When compared to the notoriety of ash trees being attacked by the emerald ash borer, it seems the die-off of the honey locust trees branch by branch by its borer and the canker is flying under the radar of the tree experts, and we don't know why. Any insight there?
That's a great point. And I don't have a good answer for you. And I think part of it is that emerald ash borer has been in the spotlight for so long. And emerald ash borer has been in Colorado, and it started in Boulder for almost a decade now. And I think it's just been one of those things that gathered a lot of public input fairly quickly and has come to the forefront. And I think you're right. There are other issues with other trees. As I mentioned earlier, it's really hard to be a tree in Denver because there's so many things that work against you, including our climate and these pests. So you've definitely opened my eyes to talk to forestry about those specifically. So I'm going to find out. I don't have a great answer for you though.
And we have another question. Where one of our members is wondering what volunteer opportunities exist for members of MDCRES, our group, to engage with the Denver Parks and Recreation.
Yes, so that is my last couple slides. We'll touch on that. So with that, I'll move on. So how can you help? So we're always looking for partnerships and volunteers to work with DPR to improve our parks. So there's a whole range of volunteer opportunities that can be one-time things or recurring volunteer opportunities if you're interested in that type of thing. As I mentioned earlier, we're I'm specifically working on a few partnerships that are really focused on our resiliency projects, specifically with community groups that are focused on those same types of topics. So I'm open to hearing any ideas you have that may interest your group and how you tie into Denver parks. Some other ways you can help, obviously shopping in Denver, supporting our sales tax that goes to parks. You can volunteer with one of our larger nonprofit partners. So the Park People and the Denver Park Trust are our kind of fundraising arms and outreach arms of Denver parks. And then the Greenway Foundation does a lot of work around South Platte River specifically. And then how can you help at home? So what does your landscape look like at home? Is it bluegrass? Do you have any native plants? So looking at ways, how can you diversify your landscape? Reducing monocultures. So if you have turf, how can you increase other types of plants? Looking at ways you can garden for wildlife. So what are the options for food that wildlife can eat in your house? Is there water available in your backyard? And what types of shelter is in your backyard? So shelter could be trees, it could be the pollinator hotel that I just mentioned, it could be evergreen shrubs. There's a whole spectrum of stuff. But think about what your landscape looks like and how it could change over time to be more resilient or more focused on what our native landscapes look like. You could build bee homes, the pollinator insect motels. You could build bat houses. You can compost. Denver has a wonderful curbside composting program. And in Denver parks, we're looking at how do we better partner with our composting program to either get that compost in our parks or get our parks compost back to them to kind of complete that cycle. That's a work in progress. And then how can you reduce irrigation at your own home? So that was my last slide. Any other questions or comments? This presentation took a little bit longer than I thought it would, but that's totally cool.
We have a couple questions here. I'll go ahead and activate my camera. One of our members is asking if Parks and Rec has solved the issue of reclaimed water killing the conifers. This gentleman noticed the red and ponderosa pines in Commons Park at Riverfront are dying slowly.
Yeah, we are very aware of this issue, especially on the east side of the city is where most of our reclaimed water systems are. And we know there's a huge conflict with conifers and the reclaimed water. I don't think we have a good answer yet. The best answer is limit use of the conifers in parks that have those systems. But that's not a great strategy for diversity and resiliency. So it's something we're working on. Our water conservation subgroup of our task force is studying that issue, and hopefully it's something they'll come up with some either pilot projects or ideas to change that over time.
Okay, and then you kind of touched on this on your last slide on what we can do, but can you direct us to any specific resources to help a homeowner to transition their Kentucky bluegrass lawn to something more water-wise, and just some guidance, give the homeowner guidance on what that might look like and what to expect and that sort of thing of some of these alternatives?
Yeah, so there's a few different ways you can do that, and some of them are more resilient and sustainable than others. So one option, completely ripping out your existing turf grass, so stripping the sod, sending that to the compost bin, and then planting your native plants or seed on that fresh dirt. I've been learning more about carbon sequestration and how our soil plays into that. So I'm starting to investigate some of the ways we can keep our grass in place and stable, and how do we reseed on top of that. So the old school way of doing that was pesticides, broadcast on the grass to kill it in place, let it rest, and then you seed over it. So the existing dying material kind of turns into your compost over time, and your native grows through that. As we all know, pesticides probably shouldn't be the answer to everything. So we'd like to get away from that, but in parks, that is some of our strategy of using strategic pesticides when we have to. On my Sanderson Gulch project, I'm trying to look at how we balance this. So that sort of idea of how do we work with what's existing. I don't want to strip it all off and take it to the landfill or take it to the compost. I'd like to leave some of that topsoil in place because it's sequestering carbon and because it's stabilizing the soil and providing nutrients. So we're continually looking at that balance of how do we do this. On a small scale backyard situation, you can do some of that through solarization. So putting down, typically it's sheets of black plastic over your lawn for a period of time that the heat will be trapped and your grass won't get sunlight, so it kills it naturally over time. And then you either till it or you seed over it in that fashion. I don't have a specific resource to point to of kind of how to do this that I recommend, but the internet is a great source for those types of things. Depending on the scale and your budget of your landscape, you can always hire a landscape professional. A lot of people will come in and do that for you if you don't want to do it yourself. Some other great resources, the city's partnering with the National Wildlife Federation for a few programs specific to wildlife and pollinator-friendly cities. So our mayor signed the Monarch Pledge a couple years ago to make Denver a pollinator-friendly city. So if you search their website, you can get some information about native plants that are pollinator-friendly, and specifically to monarchs is the point of that program. So you can get some native plant resources from that, as well as creating what is it called? Wildlife-friendly habitats. You can certify your backyard by creating the food, the shelter, the water, bringing those elements into your home landscape. The Colorado Native Plant Society has some amazing resources and lists of native plants that naturally grow in Colorado and how to find them. Frequently, a lot of our garden centers don't have those native plants. They're a little bit harder to propagate. So the more we can increase demand, from consumers for those native plants, the more they'll propagate those. So Colorado Native Plant Society is a great resource for that.
And one of our members asked for a clarification of something that you had said, asking if you meant herbicides instead of pesticides. I'm not sure of the context.
Yeah, so we use the term pesticide as an umbrella term, and herbicide is kind of nested underneath that. But yes, sort of interchangeable.
Any further questions from our membership? Give it a second. People may be typing fiendishly. I'm guessing not. Well, this concludes our presentation this evening and our session. Oh wait, here's a question. Says you list building native bee homes as a way we can help. Does the City of Denver or Parks and Recreation have an on-staff apiarist, bee specialist? Because it would be a pretty cool thing to have a bee house building clinic and donate them to the city.
That's awesome. So we don't have a specific apiarist. I'm not sure how to say that word, but we don't have one on staff. We do have a wildlife coordinator, but her spectrum is, everything from pollinators to owls to geese to beavers, the whole spectrum of urban wildlife. So she doesn't do a lot of work specific to pollinators, but I think that's great. I love that idea of doing a bee house building clinic. I think one of the things we've been talking about for our youth program is doing a workshop with them of how to build the bee hotels, or maybe bat houses, or something like that they can do that's interesting and fun and a physical something they can put in the park. So it's definitely something that's on our radar, and I'd love to figure out some kind of partnership with that if your members interested, please reach out to me.
All right, very good. Well, Jessica, thank you very much for this very interesting presentation. I'm getting positive comments here in the question and answer section, and people have enjoyed it and appreciate the time you've spent with us sharing what your department is doing.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. And my contact information is on the slide. So if anyone wants to reach out, please do. I'm available. And Greg, if you want me to share the slides, I'm happy to do that as well.
Sure. You have my email address. I'll go ahead and give out my email address for folks who, if they wish to request it. It's Winchell Greg, W-I-N as in Nancy, C-H-E-L-L, Winchell Greg at gmail.com. You also have Jessica's email there. You can email her directly if you wish. I think that's everything. Well, everyone, thank you very much and have a good evening.